Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Heller Career Development Center's Alumni Career Chats, where we're having conversation with alumni about their careers and everything in between. My name is Benny Belvin, and I'm the Assistant Dean of Career Development for the Heller School at Brandeis, and also the host of this week's webcast. I'm honored to have with us today Jeffrey Sussman, who is a Senior Associate at Booz Allen Hamilton. He is also a Heller School PhD graduate, and he received his Bachelor of Science degree in biology from Brandeis. Jeff has had a heck of a career, which has seen him as a health research analyst at the National Institute of Health, an associate director for the Council on Healthcare Economics and Policy right here at our own Heller School, and approaching 10 years at his current role at Booz Allen Hamilton. Jeff, it is a pleasure to have you with us today. How is everything going with you these days?
Thank you for having me, Benny. Appreciate it. Things are going well. Work is as busy as ever, despite all the external stuff going on, and trying to stay busy and out of trouble. So,
No,
glad I'm here.
that's good. Me too. Me too. So I'm staying busy. I'm trying to keep the trouble part in place. So I'll just jump into the first question, which
Sure.
may be basic, but it's something that people would love to know is how does one go from the Heller School to Booz Allen Hamilton? Was consulting a thing that you've always been interested in?
You know, it wasn't. It was really not even on my radar. I was aware, kind of generally, that consulting was a profession. But I always assumed, especially someone who had been at the NIH and then who came back and went to Heller, that it was going to be kind of in academia or possibly government again, maybe a think tank, something like that. And when I started looking for work while I was, about halfway through my PhD experience, I thought, well, I mean, I shouldn't, cut myself off from potential opportunities, so I'll kind of cast a wide net. And it just so happened that my wife worked for Booz Allen, but she does something very different. She does communications, and she was working with Homeland Security at the time. So I hadn't really ever thought about it, but then she mentioned, there was a health practice at Booz Allen, and there are other companies like that. Maybe I should give them a shot. And applying to tons of different jobs, having a lot of interviews, eventually getting some different offers. Turned out the best one was from Booz Allen, and that's what I accepted, and I'm still there 9 years later.
9 years later, my God. Well, that's a very exciting story. And let's keep on that line of
Sure.
how you got there, because one of the things that I know people would love to understand is what are the strategies? What tools were most helpful as you started to develop your search to get you to Booz Allen? We always talk about networking. Was
Yeah.
that helpful? So any insight around that?
Absolutely. So networking is one of those things in particular, you mentioned it, that admittedly, I was always a little skeptical about how far networking can get you. I think the
Wouldn't
answer
be
is,
alone.
I think the answer is it can get you very far. The story I didn't tell about Booz Allen, that has to do with networking is through my role helping Stuart Altman with the Princeton conference that he puts on every year. When I was running that conference, I was kind of, without realizing it, auditioning for the attendees of that conference. And one year, a senior person at Booz Allen was there. So I thought the conference was run really well. Stuart mentioned me, we met, and that was really the, one of the ways that I kind of ended up at Booz Allen. I think any kind of network. The one thing that I can say as somebody who now sees a lot of resumes come in from both undergrads and grad students, there are a lot of intelligent people. There are a lot of people who go to good schools. You start to look for what are some of the other things that they do. And, one of the strategies we use is, does anybody know this person? We love to get in-house referrals, even secondhand or friend of a friend, trying to understand if somebody has a little more insight, a little more qualitative data to go past, there's some data on the resume, right? But what else can we learn? And then even, along those lines, doing, one or two things really well, I actually think is a better strategy than doing 100 things kind of okay.
Yeah,
And I
I get
know, there's that
it.
tendency sometimes to, you feel like, oh, I got to do everything.
Yeah.
I don't think you have to do everything. I think people know if you channel your energy into one or two, let's say extracurricular type things, and you really kind of talk about it and clearly, show that whether it's on the resume or in an interview, show that that was a priority, and you channeled your energy there, and this is the key part, and you got results.
Yeah.
That's the part where I think a lot of times people, and it doesn't have to be that you save the world, right? So, but you had a goal, and hopefully you met it in some way, and just to tell that story, I think that's very helpful when you're looking for jobs, because for really, if you think about work, it's just a series of goals and things that you have to meet, and if you can show that you're good at setting a goal and meeting it, you're probably going to do pretty well in almost any career you choose.
Yeah, it's golden. Absolutely. So you have a PhD.
I do.
I mean, why? I mean, you clearly paid your dues with the
Yeah.
Bachelor of Science in Biology. You also have your Master's of Public Health. So, is this something that you saw as a prerequisite to a healthcare career, particular in consulting? And if so, is that one of the requirement? And what advice do you have for students that are interested in sort of this health consulting, health analysis field that you're in?
It's it's very much not a requirement,
Yeah.
but it also has its benefits.
Yeah.
So I work with, for example, spectrum of people with all kinds of different backgrounds, educational backgrounds, some undergrad, some masters, and again, MBA, MPP, a master's in a specific discipline, all, and then PhD. Our breakdown, just in terms of, because sometimes people want the kind of, what percent, I still think that we're actually, I want to say still 10% or less have some sort of doctorate, either MD, JD, or a medical degree.
Okay.
We still don't, but now we have a very high percent that have a master's degree. I think it's about 2/3. So the big middle is a master's. Most people tend to have a master's. Not everyone. I don't want to make it sound like you have to, but many do. You do not need to have a PhD. Now, the benefit of having it in government consulting, the biggest benefit is probably that you are, fair or unfair, disqualified from a number of roles on projects. The government will actually require that certain roles, like a project director or a PI, have a PhD.
Okay.
And if you don't have the PhD, you cannot perform that role. And so it opens up a fair amount of doors, particularly if you're in the kind of research and evaluation field.
Okay.
There are often requirements around having a PhD. There is also, some level of expectation for our clients that people who are running certain parts of our projects have a certain level of expertise. They use the PhD as a proxy, I think, to be fair. I think there are many people without a PhD who are very, very smart, quite possibly many of them smarter than I am, even with a PhD. I have no qualms about saying that. And, there are people who have PhDs who sometimes you wonder, like, how did you get a PhD? But
They played the long game.
but as a shortcut, as a proxy, that folks do use that as a
Yeah.
marker almost, and assume like, well, if you have that, maybe we can assume that you know your stuff in a certain field. So there are definitely benefits, but it is not in any way a non-starter if you don't have one. So all kinds of folks could have a great career in consulting.
And I think that's helpful because we do have students that are thinking about their PhDs. And I've met with a few of them actually over the last couple of weeks who are really considering PhDs and what to do with a PhD in terms of their next steps in their career. So this is very helpful as they think about it.
And
Yeah.
and I should just add, so we compete with a lot of different kinds of companies. Some of them do put an even greater emphasis on having a PhD.
Okay.
So Booz Allen comes out of the traditional management consulting framework, but we've kind of grown, and now we're doing all kinds of different consulting. So the work I do now is kind of more in the social science realm, working with HHS and all of the other agencies under HHS. Some of we call them, competimates, because we work with them sometimes and we compete sometimes. But for example, a Mathematica or an APT or an RTI, they have a much higher percentage of PhDs. They have a more, let's say, academic model. And so I do want to make the point that depending on which company you're looking at, you'll see a very different kind of workforce composition. And some look alike, like Booz Allen and Deloitte kind of look alike, but others don't. And just something to keep in mind as far as who maybe is looking for people at different levels. Some of those companies probably look for PhDs even more than we do.
Okay.
Maybe even require in some cases. But there's not a hard and fast rule, but there certainly are differences between the companies.
Interesting. Very insightful. So since we were talking a little bit about government,
Yeah.
you worked in government, you currently work with government partners.
Yes.
What is it like? What is your experience working for or close to a government agency? Because I know that students are interested in government to a certain degree. So, and federal government too. So what is that like?
Yeah. So, and when I was at the NIH, I worked in the director's office. And now at Booz Allen, the last 7 years, I've worked mostly with Medicare and Medicaid, helping to implement parts of the Affordable Care Act. I've also worked with military health system. I've worked with Office of the National Coordinator for Health IT. I've had a pretty good view, and there's some interesting things about government. I mean, one is, I'll just start with there's a misconception, I think, that often I think a lot of people, unfortunately, the way things are portrayed sometimes in the media, that government employees might not always care, or they're not the smartest, or there's some things you hear sometimes. That has not been my experience, at least in the various HHS agencies. Very smart people, very dedicated, many of them career employees, not overly political. I'm sure they have their views. I mean, they vote, but that kind of stuff doesn't come up often in conversation. So that was one thing that people kind of always wonder, like, what are the people even like? I think that there are some difficult parts to government. The biggest being the one that you hear in terms of kind of red tape, and there are a lot of boxes you have to check to get things done. It is not like working for a company in industry, Google or Amazon. They can go a lot faster. They don't have to get, of course, they have to get certain approvals, but within the government, often you need to get multiple levels, multiple layers of approval. I have had things where, our client will say, we need to get White House sign off, and it's like, wow, it's worked its way all the way up there, has it?
White House.
Yeah, like, that's kind of cool, a little scary, like, all right, but you can imagine this also means things slow down.
Yeah.
So there is that, I think, frustration. Some people may call it annoyance, that you would like to go faster sometimes, but you can't because you're waiting on other people. At the same time, you get to work on policies often that could, impact millions of people, or tens of millions. I mean, depending on what it is. Not that everything has to, but if you're interested in policy, often you want to look at the more macro level versus, of course, things will eventually trickle down to individuals, but you're interested in that, and so that's kind of cool to do something that could impact the entire country. And I will say, just going back to the political piece, just given where we are right now with the election, that is always it's always kind of there. So, and by that I mean, a priority is a priority for as long as it's a priority. But that changes. It changes when Congress changes. It certainly can change if the administration changes from one party to the other. And, depending on your point of view, depending on exactly what you're working on, I mean, that can be also, it can be good or bad, right? Because you'd be going from priorities that align with maybe your personal preference to maybe a priority that doesn't, or vice versa. And so it just depends, but you do have to be kind of aware of that and able to deal with that kind of change, because ultimately there are people who are in place who are political appointees, for example, who are, changing direction based on the whims of their boss, which eventually could go up to the Oval Office.
That's
and
right.
and so, you don't have full control over that. Now, to be fair though, I mean, I'll just to bring it back to industry again, I'm not sure that everybody has control over what, Jeff Bezos does with Amazon, right? So there's certain things he might do that you like and things you don't. So there probably aren't that many jobs where, when there are changes or something, a direction from the top that you can necessarily push back completely. The government is clearly it's political in the sense that there's always some party that's in charge. And so you have to kind of be okay with that.
Yeah.
And if you're not, that can be, I think, hard for some folks. Like if your beliefs are so strong that you just can't bring yourself to work on anything that's not directly aligned with them, you probably run a risk of being unhappy because, you may or may not have someone in power who agrees with you. That's just a consideration, just depending on your own personality, whether that would be a good fit or not.
And that's, I've heard that, especially from previous students and also colleagues who work for the federal government. And many have said, well, I love the work here. And the administration, depending upon who they were either hot or cold on them, but they liked the work of the agency. They were able to get strong work done. They worked with great colleagues. So I was one in particular who was a political appointee of the Obama administration. And I was at Harvard at the time, before Brandeis, and she was about to transition out. At least she said I was an appointee, and I said, "Well, are you staying?" And she was like, "Oh no, they're probably going to."
Yeah.
So there's that. I mean, sure enough, they certainly did. So, and she was sad about that. She really enjoyed the work.
Yeah. I mean, my time when I was actually working directly with the government, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I thought it was great. A lot of good people.
Yeah, that's good. So good. So there it is right there. So here's a very serious. So baseball, you like it, and I'm assuming you're good at it.
Not bad.
So what's that? How do you find time to do that? And where did that love come from?
So one of the things that I've been most happy about with my career is, and I'll preface this by mentioning I have 3 kids. One, the oldest, is a freshman in high school.
Oh, yeah.
The middle, so my oldest son, my daughter is a 6th grader starting middle school. My youngest son is 2nd grade. And for me, my dad always coached when I was a kid, and that was a very positive experience. And I always wanted to do the same thing. And I always wondered if I would have a career that kind of would allow it, based on the hours and the culture and the structure. And I have to say, I've never missed an opportunity. I've coached my oldest son, and I still coach my oldest son in baseball. I've coached him since he was 5. He's 14, and so I'm coached every year. Still coach him. I've coached him in basketball too. Coached my daughter in basketball since she was in, I think, 1st or 2nd grade. And my youngest son, I told him he got the same deal. So for baseball, he's been playing for a couple of years. I've been coaching him in baseball for a couple of years. So I have coached at least basically 2 teams at all times, meaning practices, games, and I've never missed them because of work, with the small exception of maybe a conference or 2, which I wanted to go to. So that was on me. Sometimes you just want to go to a conference, but It's been great. I mean, I played when I was in high school, and so I enjoyed, particularly coaching baseball, I think. And it's been, a really welcome feeling to know that no one is negatively judging you or feeling like, oh, you left the office at 4 o'clock today, you're a slacker, because of that. I have never had one negative comment about anything like that. And it goes beyond that. It goes beyond coaching. I mean, doctor's appointments, school, performances and stuff like that. Obviously not everybody has kids, so I think but everybody has something that they want to do.
That's right.
And I do, I would say, one thing that I've learned through my career is, you do have to kind of assign some value to that piece and figure out, what is that worth? And it's hard to assign maybe a monetary value, but you almost have to, because, you'll get different offers, hopefully things will go well for folks. And, you might have 2, 3, 4 different places you could go. And then it's, how do I decide which one? And if you do just strictly, the dollar value, you might be missing out. Sometimes that works, and maybe at times in your life that's the best decision. But I would have been much less happy if I couldn't have done any of this over the last 9 years. And if things go well, I'll be doing it for at least the next, I don't know, 6 or 7, until the youngest is done. So that's been a really important part, and I'm glad that my culture at work supports it.
So are you easy on your kids when you coach them? I mean, we see a lot of parents out there that don't know how to take the temperature down. So, or their kids just do exceedingly well. They really just go at it. And go, keep going. So
I learned, early, having done this. I actually coached before I even had kids. I coached for a few years before I even had kids, and one of the things I've learned is the more calm you are, the better atmosphere it is, the better they perform. At least that's my view, especially for younger kids.
Yeah.
They're not. It's not the major leagues. There are no scouts there, and there are no colleges about to hand scholarships or it is supposed to be fun, and it is supposed to be learning. And there were definitely times where I think early on where maybe I got a little too worked up. But now I just, people will sometimes, will say anything. They're like, wow, aren't you going to argue that? Or, and I'll say, no, I'm not. I really don't want to have an argument with the umpire, about
their wrong call.
Fair, yeah, like it's just not worth it. Does anybody want to see that? No. So I'm very zen with coaching now, and I think I've asked my kids, and they say like, yeah, the kids will tell them that they like my style because there's less yelling.
That's good.
That works for me.
Oh, good. That's great. It works for everybody. It should work for everybody. That keeps everything calm, keeps the peace. So, this has been great. And we've heard a lot about your background, experience, your career, what led to it, what strategies. As we get towards the end of this, are there any pieces of advice or kernels of wisdom that you have for students as they generally develop their careers?
Yeah.
And, certainly as they think about opportunities in government or consulting, any pieces of information, advice?
A couple things come to mind. One is you kind of never know, where an opportunity will lead you. And this might be even more about once you have a job, but one of the things I've noticed is, sometimes you might have in your mind like a very specific idea of what you should be doing, and what your plan is. And then so sometimes there might be an opportunity that comes up that doesn't exactly fit with that. And I think that's okay. I think especially earlier in your career, I mean, it might be one thing if it's, 20 years in or 30 years in, but, early in your career, you really have a lot of paths you could probably go down. And I think embracing a little bit of uncertainty and maybe something slightly different in what you're doing. And I'm particularly talking about content.
Yeah.
Technical skills. Obviously, if a job requires you to understand how to code in SAS or something, and you can't code in SAS, maybe you don't want to learn SAS. Like that's a little different. But I'm saying if you really think you're going to work on just access to care, and then all of a sudden somebody says, "I want you to work on quality," well, maybe you should give it a shot and just see where it leads you. And you're not signing a contract saying that you're giving up the thing that you loved and you're only going to work on this new thing. It's like when I tell my kids try a new food or something. Just sometimes giving it a shot is good. And along those lines, there are times where you're just trying to kind of build your knowledge in a new area, maybe build your skill set, also build your reputation, because you kind of start fresh. Again, more so early in your career than later, but you start a little fresh every time you join someplace new. People can see your resume and it reads great, but they want to actually see what is it like working with you.
That's right.
And so just kind of always you got to meet new people again. Embrace new challenges, and when you're really early in your career, again, just volunteering to do whatever.
Yes.
People really, I can't really appreciate somebody who just comes across as helpful. And even if it's not something that required a Brandeis degree to do, that's okay. That's okay. Not every single thing required that degree. We all do different things. Depending on who's in the room and what the meeting is about, I'm still taking notes, which is fine. Did I have to go to Brandeis and then back to Heller to learn how to take notes? Maybe not, but that I'm learning. I am learning, and I am helpful. In that particular role, and another time I'm doing something different. So I think it's really just about kind of embracing all different opportunities, and not assuming that you've got your entire career mapped out from graduation to retirement. That's really hard to do. And I would imagine that most people, you might agree, if you asked what they thought your career was going to look like when you kind of first started and how it's gone so far, you would have probably guessed wrong.
Yes, I know that's the case. Certainly the case in my experience.
Yeah.
Which
and hopefully,
is a good thing. It's a good thing.
And hopefully in a good way, right? But you still wouldn't have guessed right. So
Right.
Yeah, I think being open it's just a good it's a good strategy, very good strategy. And I will say one thing too, whatever you're doing, if on the how to make things best for your career, learn how to negotiate, because I can just tell you, it's almost I've almost never heard of somebody who tried to negotiate, for example, with Booz Allen, who a job offer was pulled. Occasionally, the answer might be there really is nothing else we can do, but oftentimes there's space. And so I've heard this from colleagues too. So stand up for yourself too from that perspective. Don't feel like you have no leverage or power in a situation. And again, recognize your situation. First job, different leverage than 15 years into your career and you have a current job and somebody wants you to leave to go someplace. Well, you've got even more leverage, right? But negotiate. I think a lot of folks, particularly younger folks, tend to maybe be afraid to do that, but you shouldn't.
That's absolutely great advice, especially as you think about your first, even your second job out, and certainly as you think about the salary component of negotiating. Yeah. I did my first salary negotiation. My first job after graduate school was absolutely awful, absolutely awful. So now, strong caveat: I wasn't a career advisor at the time, so just keep that. Well. That's all the time we have for today. But Jeff, thank you for being with us. We really do appreciate it. It's been very helpful, very insightful, and we certainly appreciate all that you do for the Heller School.
Thank you.
Yes. And for those of you who are listening, we hope that this was informative and helpful as you consider your own professional development. And we will see you next time for the next Career Chat.